before we dive into a scene, let's read together Precepts 4 through 7, including Dogen and Bodhidharma's commentary. So 4 is not speaking falsely. Does anyone need a copy?
Do you have one, Dogen?
I have stairs. I think I have stairs. Oh.
I can come upstairs. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And I don't know if people are actually spending some time with the, probably those of you who are sewing and thinking about Jukai might be spending time with the precepts, but I encourage you over the next week, if you haven't been reading these over more regularly, to really start. I mean, we're now cooking. We're now getting good. This is our second to last class, so I really encourage diving into the language a little bit. Not speaking falsely.
The Dharma wheel turns from the beginning. No excess, no deficiency. One complete moistening of sweet dew, gaining reality, gaining the truth. In the unexplainable Dharma, not explaining one word, is the precept of not speaking falsely. Not dealing in intoxicants. Do not bring intoxicants in. Do not let them come in. This is truly the great brightness. In the originally pure Dharma, not giving birth to ignorance is the precept of not dealing in intoxicants. Not discussing faults. Within Buddha Dharma, all have the same path, same Dharma, same realization, and same practice. Faults are not discussed. The way is not corrupted. In the faultless Dharma, not discussing faults and sin is the precept of not discussing faults. Not praising self and criticizing others. Buddhas and ancestors realized the entire sky and the green earth, manifesting the great body. There is no inside or outside in the sky. Manifesting the Dharma body, on earth there is not an inch of ground. In the equitable Dharma, not discussing self and other is the precept of not praising self and criticizing others. Whew.
Buddhas and ancestors realized the entire sky and the great earth, manifesting the great body. There is no inside or outside in the sky. Manifesting the Dharma body on earth, there is not an inch of ground. You know, the precepts, and particularly as we receive them through Dogen's commentary, you know, offer this incredible image of wholeness, right? Of together with all beings, this image of a greatness so great that it's not separate from what is small. Right? It's this incredible, it's a vision of purity. You think about the ways in which purity comes up in the language of not dealing in intoxicants. You know, this is truly the great brightness. This sense of a kind of immaculacy that is so great. It includes what we might call dirt, right? And this is really, I mean, this is the huge gift that Buddhism, I think, gives to the world, this vision of this greatness, this great greatness, this maha greatness. But it's also a great poison that Buddhism gives to the world, paralyzing, right? This greatness that is so paralyzing because it's so, like, what do you do? Right? What do you do in a world of all-pervading perfection? Like, how do you make sense of that? And that's the paralysis we see in the story of Nansen's cat, right? Speak a word of Zen now, if you want to save this cat. Well, you know, precept number 4, like, how can I explain the unexplainable Dharma? What can be said? So, I mean, that's kind of where we're grappling with. The challenge that Buddhism presents, right, is how we hold this greatness as small beings. Like really, how do we do that? How do we actualize? How do we speak a word of Zen? Where speak is just a kind of metonym for all of the different ways of expression, right? How do we speak a word of Zen? Speak, act, do, feel, create, figure, whatever. All of those possible verbs, right? Does this question make sense? Little things, big things. How do they go together? We can think about this in the language that Western philosophy likes to think about things, the particular and the universal, or we can use sort of more Buddhist-y sounding words, the relative and the absolute. But for me, I feel like I am small. I feel like Buddhism gives me an image of the biggest big I can even, and so little things, big things. That's how I think about this. Dogen Zenji, that language that I shared last week, and it's on the handout, but I'm not handing the handout now because I'm no fool. Not yet, no handout yet. But that language from last week that we talked about, the activity of Buddha is carried on together with the whole earth and all living beings. If it is not activity that is one with all beings, it is not Buddha activity. So when Uchiyama Roshi talks about this activity of the Buddha, this one with all, this together with all beings, he says people who practice true Zazen can confirm as actual experience what Dogen Zenji is pointing out in that passage as the foundation of daily life. Acting in accordance with the entire earth and with all beings is Zazen's practitioners' whole life direction, and simultaneously it is their direction here and now. In Buddhism, this life direction is referred to as vow. Okay, so vow maybe connects little things with big things, but what does that really mean? How do we live together with all beings? So let me set the scene with a big thing. In late March of this year, so just a few weeks ago, an ice shelf the size of New York City. Okay, I'm reading from an article. This is NPR's reporting, but you guys may have heard of this or read other articles. This is just the language NPR used. An ice shelf the size of New York City has collapsed in East Antarctica, an area long thought to be stable and not hit much by climate change, concerned scientists said Friday. The collapse, captured by satellite images, marked the first time in human history that the frigid region had an ice shelf collapse. It happened at the beginning of a freakish warm spell last week when temperatures soared more than 70 degrees, that's Fahrenheit, 40 degrees Celsius, warmer than normal in some spots of East Antarctica. Satellite photos show the area has been shrinking rapidly the last couple of years, and now scientists wonder if they have been overestimating East Antarctica's stability and resistance to global warming that has been melting ice rapidly on the smaller western side and the vulnerable peninsula. The ice shelf, about 460 square miles wide, holding the Conjure and Glenser glaciers from the warmer water, collapsed between March 14th and 16th. An oceanographer named Catherine Walker said, scientists have never seen this happen in this part of the continent, making it worrisome. And the article goes on. So one researcher says, we need to know how stable each one of the ice shelves are, because once one disappears, it means glaciers melt into the warming water, and some of that water will come to San Diego and elsewhere. Yeah, understatement. Right? Okay. An ice shelf the size of, New York City collapses in East Antarctica. What do you do? What do you do? And that's an actual question. What do you do when you are reminded about climate change? And she stuns everyone into silence. What do you do? Well, how are we? This is a real question.
I go through a period of, I guess, grief or distraughtness. And yeah, maybe a little helplessness, maybe a little despair. And then I just try to refocus on my everyday life and what things I'm connected to or what actions that I'm taking that are attempting to move the needle in the other direction, or just like reevaluating the regard that I have for what I consume every day or where I spend my energy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, like more process than content.
Okay.
But
So why is it more process than content?
well, the answer I'm saying is more process than content. It's not like getting into the nitty gritty.
Oh yeah, you don't like, yeah. So there's not an action that is doing something. There's a reflection on what you're already doing and maybe a refocusing.
Yeah, well, yeah, just a reevaluating of what I'm already doing. Like, which, I guess a concrete example is recently I'd always just thought of single-use plastic as like disposable bottles and grocery bags. But then I realized, no, it's like everything is single-use plastic.
Mm.
Like if I buy a candy bar that comes in a plastic wrap, I don't know. So it just,
Yeah.
now
Okay.
I was buying things without regard or consuming without regard
Okay.
for the waste. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a sort of beautiful example, Matt, because that way in which you're like, oh, this is single use too. Anyone who's in the Jukai loop now and you start thinking about the precepts and you're like, oh, maybe that's an example of killing too. You know, where you sort of like your world expands and you think, oh, this is part of the issue too. Oh, this is part of the issue. So that's an interesting example. I mean, this is really different than dunk, 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 someone's knocking at the door. What do you do? What do you do? Right? What's different about this example than someone's knocking?
It's like remarkably removed from where I sit right now.
Yeah.
I feel a lot of overwhelm with it, and as much as I can, you know, there's like a really large amount of desensitization that has happened from growing up. Like my entirety of my life, you know, has been spent with people being like, there's climate change, you know, there's all this stuff happening, you know, like stop using single-use plastic. And I'm in full support of that, you know, but there's this other thing that's going on where I'm like, you see these companies and stuff, the people that are like driving this, and like how that ice shelf is completely tied in to the very way that the economy works on a daily basis.
So if it's remote, how does it being remote also make it overwhelming?
Because I want to do something about it. I live my life in a way that if it were my ice shelf and I was supposed to be doing something with it, there'd be something to be happening with it, like right now, you know?
Yeah, you were very clear when I said, this guy's upstairs, what do you do, what do you do? You're like, turn him in. That was very clear. It's your house, it's your friend, your door. This isn't my ice shelf. What do I do with, yeah. I mean, this is obviously totally not a fair question. I'm saying, what do you got? And I'm not saying, what are you doing about climate change? I'm saying, what do you do?
So I'm going to make it harder. You've heard of single-use plastics come up twice. The replacement for single-use plastics for bottles, for example, is glass. Glass is heavier. It takes more fuel to move glass, and you have to burn more oil to move glass than plastic. You don't get the same waste. But you still, it's just, yeah, this is the thing. The problem is itself emergent from a vast network of causes and conditions.
Okay.
There is no one thread that we can pull on to resolve that. And that, for me, results to a certain extent in paralysis.
In paralysis, right.
Yeah.
Okay. So the paralysis that you're citing, James, right? And is this a common thing that folks feel with like a question like, what do you do about climate change? Are people feeling sort of like, what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There are things that we do, but they feel ineffective.
So the paralysis there, let's just, I don't want to go all the way into this right now, but it's the same paralysis as nonsense cat, right?
Mm.
It's the same, because it is the paralysis of recognizing the ineradicable, absolute mutuality of all things, right? It's like, it's all freaking connected. How do I, right? It doesn't feel nice. It doesn't feel like, oh, we're all Buddhas. It doesn't have that flavor of emptiness as a teaching about our Buddhahood. We're all together in this. It has that kind of dysphoric, I think, sense of, I'm so teeny. What do I do? What do I do? Does that seem right?
I guess I feel, I don't know exactly the angle that you're coming from here, just because like, I don't necessarily feel like we're like the monks who don't have anything to say, because we're saying stuff like all the time. Like I make choices on a daily basis now, and I have no problem talking about like ways that I can do things and can help other people to see like, hey, like, don't buy clothes with polyester in it, because that's plastic, and like, it's gonna just go into the water system. You know, there's all these sorts of things like that. And so it's not like I don't have anything to say, it's just that, what am I gonna do about the ice shelf? I can't.
Okay. So the monks are also not inactive. They don't speak, but their not speaking is an action, right? So the question, and this, you know, one of the classic ways to talk about this, is, you know, think globally, act locally, right? That's like the classic, isn't that the classic formulation for how do we work with these things that are so big? We, you know, and this is what Matt was pointing to, like these decisions that are really like, okay, what is here for me to decide, right? So that's a kind of classic way to make sense of this. The Buddhist formulation for that is actually skillful means. So let's dive back into the question of skillful means from last time, and I want to think about the Lotus Sutra, that story of the wayward son that we didn't really dive into, and I want to talk about it because I think getting a sense of what's at stake with it is super helpful. One of the things that the Buddha is talking about, so again, this is like a story that's about the relationship between the Shravakas, so these followers of the Buddha who have thought, okay, this is all about purifying myself, it's all about cleaning up my act, it's all about reaching nirvana in this lifetime for me, and that sort of earlier expression of Buddhism, as opposed to the later Mahayana expression, which is like, oh no, this is about saving all beings, this is about liberation of all beings, this is about we're all awakened together at one time. We're all already Buddhas. So that shifting that I talked about last week, and actually in our very first class together, in terms of the movement that we see even in the pure precepts, from this early formulation of ethical action of at the beginning of it's on top of the handout. That movement from the teaching of all Buddhas to avoid all evil, to cultivate good, and to purify one's mind, that expresses the path of the Shrivakayana, as opposed to where that evolves by the time that the Lotus Sutra is written, where we have the three sets of pure precepts, the precepts of restraining behavior, the precepts of doing good, and the precepts of benefiting living beings. Okay, so is that distinction between the Shrivaka path and the Mahayana path clear? Yeah. So in this passage from the Lotus Sutra, and I'm looking here on page 151, and I'm just going to read the passage because I just want to make sure we have it together. These are the Shravakas saying, oh, now we understand. We thought we were following the right path in seeking our own cessation of suffering in this lifetime. And we're just like the young man in the story we're about to tell. Okay, so the parable is about what it means for the Shravakas to realize that there's another way, and that way has been here all along. So I'm looking at, folks have this passage. Do people have the Lotus Sutra in front of them? Okay, we'll just do story time. That's good because I'm sleepy anyway, so we'll just story time. Okay. So I'm sort of halfway through the story as it's being told in the verse section. In the Lotus Sutra, and this is really common in a lot of sutras, where you have like a prose version of the story, and then it's like, and to say it again in another way, and then it goes into verse, because why say something once when you can say it twice, right? You say it in verse and people will remember it. Okay. So the verse section. The father gathered together his relatives, the kings and ministers, the nobles and ordinary citizens before this great assembly. And this is at the end. Can someone remind us, like, what the deal was with the young man? What happened with him? And
which deal? The fact that he was not around. He left. He had like a good amount of money right out of it, and then he, or maybe he didn't actually. And anyway, he became very poor and destitute, and was on like the bottom rung of society all the way. And then he comes, and during the same time, his father has achieved like a significant amount of grandeur in his life and station, so much so that the young man, without realizing it, goes to his own father for his to get some sort of job, basically, and doesn't recognize him.
And the father, in fact. Remember this part, super important, and this is what is going to be explained and discussed in the section I'm going to read. The father's like, okay, my son, he's freaking out. He thinks he's going to be taken to prison and put to work, or something terrible is going to happen to him. So I'm not going to tell him that I'm his father. He feels too unworthy, because he faints in the father's ministers grab the young man, and he faints, he freaks out, he thinks he's being taken away. He doesn't recognize his father, and he doesn't recognize himself, right? His own true heritage. So the father's like, okay, I'm going to pretend that I'm offering him a job. And sometimes I'm going to be kind of mean to him. I'll act like the foreman of this job. Sometimes I'll be mean. Sometimes I'll be encouraging. And over time, I'll give him more money. He'll rake up some dung, and he'll work really hard. I'll reward his effort. And then eventually I'll bring him into the house and give him more responsibilities and give him more pay. And then, when he's ready, I'll announce who I really am, and I will give him his true inheritance. And this is what's happening in the passage that I'm about to read. The father gathered together his relatives, the king and ministers, the nobles and ordinary citizens before this great assembly. He announced, "This is my son who left me and went off somewhere for 50 years. And since I saw my son come back, 20 years have gone by." So his son is 70. The father's like, this is long time, Buddhist time. Things take time, right? One of the messages of this story. "Long ago in some other city, I lost my son. I went all around searching for him and eventually came here. All that I have, houses and people, I give entirely to him. He is free to use them as he wishes." The son thought of his earlier poverty and feelings of inferiority, and of how he had now, from his father, received such great treasures, along with houses and buildings and all his wealth. He was overjoyed at having received what he had never had before. Now we get the moral of this parable. The Buddha, too, is like this. Knowing that we are pleased with small things, you did not tell us before you can become Buddhas. So now the Shravakas are addressing the Buddha himself and saying, knowing that we are pleased with small things, you did not tell us before you can become Buddhas. Instead, you told us about becoming free of fault, fulfilling a lesser vehicle, and being Shrivaka disciples. The Buddha ordered us to preach the supreme way, since those who study it and put it into practice can become Buddhas. Having received the Buddha's teaching, using causal explanations, various parables, and a variety of other kinds of expression, we taught the unexcelled way for the sake of great bodhisattvas. When children of the Buddha heard the Dharma from us, they pondered over it day and night and diligently studied and practiced it. Then the Buddha assured them, saying, in future lives you will become Buddhas. This idea that only later did the Father entrust him with all his wealth. So too with the Buddha displaying rare actions and knowing that some want little things. The Buddha uses the power of skillful means to soften and temper them, and then teaches them great wisdom. Okay. Are the lineaments of this story clear enough to work with? So what's up with this? What's the Father doing? What is the whole thing about the Son being inferior? Why is that the way this plays out? And what is being said here about the Buddha? The Buddha who, didn't tell the Shravakas, knowing that we want small things. The Buddha says, okay, purify yourself from defects, you'll feel cessation, you'll free yourself from suffering, you'll be a good Shravaka, you'll enter the Pure Land. He didn't tell us we could become Buddhas. Now it turns out we're all Buddhas. What's the message here about us, because we're the Shravakas, we're the Son? What's the message here about the Buddha? What's the message here about skillful means? Why this great misdirection or deception or whatever it is?
Just remember whenever the son meets the father, and that I don't know, where the son just kind of stumbles upon him in that place. The father is not just thinking he's gonna run because he thinks he's gonna be taken. He's also thinking he's not in a place where he can necessarily grasp where I am at this time. There's all of the I don't know, the splendor, the money, the power, all those sorts of things are it can affect a person in really profound ways. And I feel like that's kind of what we're dealing with in our lives as we're approaching this, as the Buddha's dealing with these Shravakas, how much ego is involved with that? How much better is this path, this slow path where you kind of build up to something rather than, I don't know if that's making sense.
Yeah, no, it's totally making sense. The thing that strikes me in all this, right? So there's this way in which the son is not prepared. We're not prepared. The way that's described is you want small things. What does that mean? What does it mean to want small things? What does it mean to say that the son's fear and his not understanding his inheritance, that sense of unworthiness, inferiority is about wanting small things? Does that phrase resonate with anyone? James, are you? You're saying, yeah. Do you want to add words to that nod?
When I showed up at the door here, I think the one thing that was the one goal that I had was, okay, I just want to be less of an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the time, that seemed like an enormous thing.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
now it's still an enormous thing.
I hear your brother. Yeah, I just want to be less of a bitch.
And then I come here, we said, they say, oh, we're all Buddhists. I'm like, I thought I was signing up for the less asshole course.
Yeah. So on the one hand, it seems huge, like what the Shravakas accomplished in their lifetimes of freeing themselves from the the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion. That seems pretty big. From where I sit, again, I just want to be less, whatever, right? So, but how is that a small thing? What's small about it?
It seems like it's just very personal.
Yeah.
It's just my interaction from me to one person.
Yeah.
My daily thing.
Yeah. The language of the seventh grave precept. Buddhas and ancestors realized the entire sky and the great earth, manifesting the great body. There is no inside or outside in the sky. Manifesting the Dharma body on earth, there is not an inch of ground. Do we have any clue of what our true body is? How big it is? We understand our bodies to be this small thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jason.
I'm trying to get my head around this, and in a sense, it feels like a huge relief in some way, like all is well,
Yeah.
like there's nothing we're supposed to
Right.
get, that in some way all of it is perfect, even the global warming piece, etc. And in that space, we also have to understand that we are that compared to that, in the perfection of all of it, what we are imagining ourselves to be is truly small. And yet at the same time, all of the characters sort of in this story are showing up at the place that they can show up at that time. And so I'm getting this sense of like, it's all perfect, and at the same time,
Right.
we each have an obligation to try and move towards that bigness in the best way that we can.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's, the Dogen's version of this in the universally recommended instructions for Zazen, the way is originally perfect and all pervading, right? It's perfect. How can it be contingent on practice and realization? Like, it's all perfect. Now get your ass on the cushion, right? And holding that together. Like, how do we hold that together? So, skillful means. How does skillful means appear in this story? What is the skillful means?
The father, disguises himself as like a foreman and has the son doing he chose shovel and dung,
Right.
And he keeps him there by giving him double the pay and allowing him to live, to have a all right standard of living, and just everything that the father is doing is this big setup for, in 20 years I'm totally gonna tell him he's my son, and I'm gonna give him everything.
And why does he need to do that? What's the language that gets used in the parable is, when it gets explicitly connected to the Buddha softens and tempers us. Knowing that we like small things. Why is that what has to happen for the son? Matt?
What I keep thinking about is the kind of therapist term or phrase of meeting someone where they are.
Yeah.
So the skillful means is, I think, being able to see things pretty clearly, and then let that guide, how you interact with somebody,
Yeah. 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 And recognizing, seeing them where they are, and recognizing that their small thing is their everything.
Mm-hmm.
When you come through the door at the, as your first time here, and you just want to be less of an asshole, that is bodhicitta, right? That's the whole thing. That it's right there. All the precepts are right in that aspiration. Nothing is missing. Nothing is missing. But it's small. It's also small.
Mm.
So let's read together. Domyo Burke, who is a teacher in Kyogen Carlson from Dharma Rain, in his lineage, she has a Zen Sangha called Brightway Zen. Is it in Portland? I'm thinking, or in
Beaverton.
In Beaverton, yeah.
Which is a good podcast too.
Oh, she has a podcast?
Yeah,
Yes.
I was
Oh.
just listening to it today.
All right. Okay. So this is from Domyo's discussion of skillful means on the handout. And will someone get us started with that first paragraph, the Buddhist concept?
The Buddhist concept of skillful means addresses the difficulty of translating our wisdom and good intentions into beneficial results. In essence, it says that in order to help people change for the better, you need to take into account whether they can hear you, and if so, accept what you have to say.
Thank you. Next paragraph. Wilcox, will you take it away?
From the beginning of Buddhism, it has been acknowledged it's a daunting task to communicate deeper spiritual truths and get human beings to let go of their greed, hate, and delusion. It said the Buddha himself, after achieving enlightenment, strongly considered never bothering to try teaching anyone what he had discovered. He was convinced few people would even want to hear about it, let alone be able to accept or understand it. So he figured he'd just enjoy the peace of enlightenment by himself. According to the Pali Canon, the Buddha thought,
Go ahead.
enough now with teaching what only with difficulty I reached. This Dharma is not easily realized by those overcome with aversion and passion. What is obtuse, subtle, deep, hard to see, going against the flow, those delighting in passion, cloaked in the massive darkness, won't see.
Buddhism is encouraging us not to give up when people don't hear us. Instead, it points us towards skillful means. What's actually going to work? When we turn our creativity toward the problem, what ways could we get our message heard while maintaining a sincere desire to benefit others? So how is she applying what we see in the Lotus Sutra to the world, to life? How does she understand skillful means in the context of living in this world, meeting people where they are? What's she inviting us to do? It's a daunting task to communicate deeper spiritual truths. So what should we do?
Sounds trite, but it sounds like she's saying we need to find what works. We need to apply ourselves to considering the situation.
Yeah. So we should find what works. She gives some examples here, some guidelines here, that there are things we need to take into account. Can this person even hear me? Can they even hear me right now? And if they can hear me, are they actually willing to take in these words? They can hear me, but it's like, how deep is the resistance? And even if they're willing to listen and accept, do they get it? Can they summon what's needed to meet whatever I'm saying? And then she says, if you can't get people to go to the ultimate goal, find a goal B, a secondary goal, which is kind of on the way to the ultimate goal, that they might be more willing to go toward, and get them to do that. And then she says, this can feel a little deceptive, but if there's no good alternative and you sincerely have people's best interests in mind, is there a creative way to bring about beneficial consequences for all? And once you get them on board, how much change are they capable of doing? And if people respond to your efforts by attacking you, can you see this as arising from their own insecurities and not take it personally? So she's explicitly like, how do we change people? How do we move people toward their best interests? How do we do that? And she says, these considerations might seem pretty modern, she says. They might sound like the kind of strategy for communication that you might bring into your workplace, but these modern kind of strategy ideas, she says, these are not modern ideas. These go back to the Lotus Sutra. So, skillful means as a strategy to move the world, a local strategy to affect change. What's helpful about that perspective? How is that a helpful perspective? What's not so helpful about that perspective? Does that question make sense?
One of the issues I had with the skillful means of the father is it felt like there were judgment calls that he was making sort of around the son's ability to move or to decide his own fate or different things like that. And so I could both see sort of the being with and being like I recognize and can acknowledge the human experience of my son, but there were other moments where I felt like you're really superimposing your own ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. Wilcox.
I was mostly agreeing. I had also those problems that I was trying to realize this is not my culture. I'm a different culture. I've been trained to think about, empowerment and all this stuff.
that it was hard to grasp. It was hard to accept that cultural difference.
Yeah.
But in theory, I think skillful means is wonderfully useful because you're going to get your goal right. You're not going to get your goal if you don't do something to move forward, right? And so this is a way in which things will change.
This is, so it's like, okay, so if I recognize and build on my connection with others and think about, hold them with compassion and meet them with compassion and work with my own reactivity, then, we can start movement. But you were saying, Wilcox, if you've got a goal, what's problematic about, I think you're both naming it about the father, to be in that position where we're like, okay, I know what's best here. Mm-hmm. I know what needs to happen. What's potentially problematic about that?
I guess like you, as a father myself, I can definitely say that there's like a certain level of like, there's certain like qualification of thought that's necessary when I think about my son, like there's like this an immense amount of compassion and no amount of of manipulation,
Manipulation.
I'm not like, if there's any like adjustment, if there's any sort of deception as it would be seen, it's only meant as like a skillful means to draw him into something. And so if you're like interacting with, it's much murkier when you're dealing with other people.
Yeah, so that word manipulation, or Domyo Burke's word strategy, there's something that is a little bit tricky there, right? Or maybe very tricky. How do we live together with all beings? How do we act in that Buddha activity? If what we're doing is thinking, I'm going to kind of, I know what will move Shanae. Okay, I know what will move Shanae. If I say da-da-da-da-da-da, then Shanae's on board, right? Is that being with Shanae? Or when would that be being with Shanae? Does that question make sense? Like, so going back to the father and the son, what the father sees is the son's true nature. The son can't see it. The son is, his sense of himself and his life is so small. He can't, the idea you're a Buddha, you're wealthy beyond measure, there's no frame. So how do I help someone see who they truly are? That's different than how do I get this person to climb on board for my climate change agenda? Maybe it isn't. Maybe there's a place for activism that comes from seeing one's true nature. But this is the rub. So the doctrine, that makes it all grandiose. The idea of skillful means, if we live in a universe of, I'm thinking of Meg here, and of radical mutuality, like we literally, there's no separation. Then skillful means says, and so that's also a world of radical, complete, total, ineradicable contextuality. There's nothing but context. If it's all together, then actually everything is context. This particular context, that particular context, that particular context, that particular context. Does that make any sense at all? If everything is interconnected, we might think globally, act locally, but the global globality, if I can say it like that, of the Mahayana also means that everything is local. There's nothing but the local. Does that make sense? I can't trade off this local for something over there. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. On some level?
I think so. Are you trying to say that kind of like all relativistic qualifiers need to drop off at some point because...
I may be saying, if I really want to meet you where you are, I can't be doing so to get somewhere over there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So then what? Let's talk about Russia. Can we talk about Russia?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys read that Tavernese piece. I had already picked the other article, but the Tavernese piece is, I read it and I was like, I found it very, very powerful. So let's just read this excerpt together, and someone who hasn't read yet, maybe, I don't know, maybe someone in the Zoom land, if you guys have the handout. Or Dan.
Sure.
Okay, so get us started, Dan, and read as much of it as you want.
All right. 15 years earlier, Boris Yeltsin left power in shame, apologizing on national television for having failed to justify the hopes of the people who believed that we would be able to make a leap from the gloomy and stagnant totalitarian past to a bright, prosperous, and civilized future at just one go. By summer of 2015, his successor, President Vladimir V. Putin, had seemingly made Russia bright and prosperous. The political system he built was increasingly restrictive, but many had learned to live with it. Okay. Many Russian liberals had gone to work for nonprofits and local governments, throwing themselves into community building, making their cities better places to live. A protest movement in 2011 and 2012 had failed, and people were looking for other ways to shape their country. Big politics were hopeless, the thinking went, but one could make a real difference in small acts. But in the weeks since Russia invaded Ukraine, I have felt like I am watching someone I love lose their mind. Many of the Russian liberals who had turned to small acts are feeling a sense of shock and horror, too, said Alexandra Arkhipova, a Russian anthropologist. I see lots of posts and conversations saying these small deeds, it was a big mistake. She said, people have a metaphor. They say, we were trying to make some cosmetic changes to our faces when the cancer was growing and growing in our stomachs.
Yeah. And we'll come back to that quote of Alexei Navalny, that the fight is not good against evil, but good against neutral. I don't know if that's a helpful formulation, but what resonates for you or is interesting to you about this articulation of things in Russia?
I think it's a macrocosm of the whole. I mean, to go back to the very beginning, the sort of question about the ice shelf and Manson's cat, that there is a sense of, we have to try not to be hysterical.
No, go, please, be hysterical.
The problem is, I'm a Master of Science in Sustainability, and this is a tipping point, right?
Yeah.
Like, a tipping point that no one has ever been able to say we could come back from.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
recycling was never going to work. And I don't know if it's true or not, but someone who supposedly did research was speaking about that it had been started by the petroleum companies to give us something to do so we would leave them alone. And
the carbon footprint thing.
right, so we're sitting here dealing with like these small things, like I'm gonna have a metal straw and I'm gonna use glass and I'm gonna do all this stuff, but the real problem is a systemic problem. It's much, much bigger that,
Yeah.
you know, and there's a part of me, and this is just, let's call it a philosophical theory, not what I'm out there to do, but there's a part of me thinking about things about how to make it work. What would be the skillful means? This is totally not Buddhist.
No.
But-
this is totally Buddhist, Wilcox.
Well, I feel like we are on a trolley, right?
Yeah.
We are hurtling down our own demise. And who's going to die? It's going to be either we get rid of the politicians and the companies who are destroying the earth These are the things that are keeping us from surviving.
Yeah.
So either they need to stop, okay, we put them all in prison. I mean, we need a French Revolution of the world revolution to have any hope or prayer at all, or a miracle, aliens saving us, something,
Right.
or,
Yeah.
you know, or we're all gonna die in 50 years. I mean, it's soon. You know, so that is science. And so this is, so what do I do? What do I have to do? And I've been in deep depression
Yeah.
since my master's program.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's that everyday living my best life,
Yeah.
enjoying the beauty that I see, sitting on the cushion. That is the only answer I see for myself.
Okay.
And until I die, you know,
Yeah.
because I don't see that it's possible
Right.
for us to come back from this.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Right. Yeah. And we're seeing that same structure I mean, I don't have enough fingers for on my hands to tick off the huge issues that we could say, well, this is systemic, what the hell?
Mm-hmm.
So here we have, in the case of Russia, right? Which, I mean, sounds a lot like Germany in 1938. Sounds a lot like, in some ways, United States maybe in a few years, right? I mean, do people feel, am I...
Mm-hmm. I mean, he just like harnessed this power of like image, where he was able to put a veneer over something and kind of sparkle stuff, while at the same time taking advantage of.
Are you talking about Putin?
Yeah, the workings of this world, which operate entirely on money. You know, he's just like, he just built a system underneath. And what these people are doing with like we're gonna community build, you know, they're like doing all these small things.
Right, right. So they're doing all these small things. They're not at the place where Wilcox is describing that you're at, right? I mean, I think they might be there now.
Right, they're just seeing.
They're in the metal straws.
Because they ignored it, that it got out of control.
But
and I feel like that's the same thing. We've ignored what's been going on in the world and it's now out of control.
So, but I want to push back against the word ignoring. So, and I think this is what makes this where we are. I mean, I can't imagine what it'd be like to teach this class in another time because I'm teaching it now. But teaching this class in 2022, in March and April of 2022, it's like, holy crap. We're in an ethical crisis. That's even a stupid way to say it, but like, whoa, this is big time. Like, am I articulating something that feels true?
I guess I'm kind of bewildered by, maybe this is a talk for another time, but by people feeling that way, because it's always happening.
Right.
You know, people are like, oh, Ukraine. I'm like,
but okay, fair enough.
But we're constantly in some form of war.
Yeah.
You know, people are dying all around the world, and now
Yeah.
for some strange reason.
Because it feels European and it feels like us. Yeah.
Right. We didn't care about a lot of those brown people,
Yeah.
yellow
Okay.
people, you know.
Yeah. So right on. Right on. Yeah. It's like, you know, it's like the way George Floyd's murder, sort of, racism, it's systemic. Yeah, it's kind of been systemic for a while now, like in the history of the West and the history of the East. Yeah, this is kind of... So, but we are at some kind of ethical tipping point, I think, where the public discourse is open in a way that it hasn't been. So what do we do? What do we do? So Wilcox was sharing from the standpoint of Zair's depression was a word you used. Another word I might use was grief.
Yeah, that too. I mean,
Yeah.
and anger. Like
And
I'm
anger.
really, really angry, and that's what the depression's about, right? I am so angry.
Okay.
But I can't express that anger. I don't know what to do with it. Right?
Okay.
So it goes
So,
here.
yeah. But you do know what to do with it. You are doing with it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask what else, if anyone else wants to share, what arises for them. Not what do you think about this, but what arises for you as you think about. So I'm bringing forward this example from Russia, which really spoke to me. Climate change I also brought forward today. But anything, what is burning in you right now, if anything? If anyone else wants to share, what's burning?
I'll share.
Yeah.
You know what? It's as if we're going to get to some point where it's right at our door. And until it's at our door, we're still congealing our relationships, getting stronger, figuring out what to do, you know? And it's difficult to be in that position. But to me, it does feel like the time where we recognize that there is a lot of grieving and a lot of action and a lot of strength that we're building so that we can be ready. I don't know, maybe we're supposed to be doing it now. It, which to me means going out in the street and, you know, changing things in a large groups of people. But that's where I'm at. I can't organize that myself, but I can be ready when that moment comes. It's, you know, these people left their countries, the ones that we read in the story from the
from the New Yorker.
And they have lost all their connections with each other.
Yeah.
They don't have those connections to fall back on to resist anymore. And in fact, they're feeling a lot of discrimination, some of them, right?
Yeah.
As Russians in other countries. So we're going to have to stay together is how I often see it.
Okay.
Find our networks.
So staying together, finding our networks. Yeah.
Can I just add a thing?
Yes, please.
So the International Panel of Climate Change report came out just within a few weeks. I don't remember. I have terrible sense of time. And so the scientists have been sitting with this. In theory, technically, we have all of the science we need to solve this. All of it. And the only thing, and they named it in the report, is the only thing that is stopping us are the politicians.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to do. You know, change the leadership.
Okay.
So that would solve Putin too.
So let's get Buddhisty about this now.
Yeah.
Okay. And here kind of calling on Jason's channeling of the all is well part. How does that deep sense that we've all, I mean, I got you guys all to agree to this last week. I mean, Dan, I don't think you were here, so you didn't agree to it, but that we've all kind of touched in Zazen some sense of the together with all beings that Dogen invokes, right? This sense of, I have it here on the back of the page too. The activity of Buddha is carried on together with the whole earth and all living beings. That sense of the great body, you all agreed with me, we all touched that we've all touched that in our Zazen to some degree, yeah? All is well. The way is originally perfect and all-pervading. How is that a resource? Is it a resource? Is sitting Zazen a resource?
Myobun.
Yeah.
Like, for me, it feels like reasons that I think in moments like this, it can feel like life can feel so personal. And it can feel like the weight or the obligation falls squarely on us, or that the urgency feels so desperate. And there's in having the context of, I am a small little nugget on a small little planet in a vast universe that is doing what it's doing. There's a sense of I can relax into what I can do. I be the reality that is this reality, and I don't know. There's a relaxing into my limitation and into my power.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So one way I might reframe that, which might not actually capture what you're saying, is that we can kind of find this body which is, and this is also something that Uchiyama Roshi talks about. I don't think I have the quote here where he talks about it, but where he talks about Zazen as the place where we actualize what it is to be a person, and to be a person is to be the unity of the eternal and the temporal, or the absolute and the relative. Like we find our body, right? Which isn't the small body, isn't exactly the great body, because I'm still 5'3" if I am on tiptoe. I am still this singular such like being, but I can find this body. So that might be a thing, to find my limits and my power. And what else? How do we touch into skillful means here? The deep skillful means, not just like skillful means as a strategy that you can use in the boardroom, but the deep skillful means. How do we touch into that?
I'm kind of reminded about how when I'm not when I'm not doing well, I'm just using that very generally, and I'm encountered with some heavy stuff. Somebody's upset at me about something, maybe I don't agree with them very strongly, I get pushed to my stress threshold collapses, and all of a sudden I'm angry and upset. I'm like giving it right back to them. But this place that we're touching into in Zazen is something that allows me to have that pause and that breath that we've been talking about before, that moment to be like, what are you gonna do? I get to have that moment because I'm able to touch into everything else, as opposed to.
So I'm not just going to add to the anger and the chaos, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I'm reminded of Thich Nhat Hanh, being able to walk around Vietnam during the war and just they'd be just practicing, just bombs just going off all in the same village, there's landmines, people just dying all around, and he's just he's doing that Thich Nhat Hanh thing. He's got a smile on his face. They're building community, all this sort of stuff. It's just so easy to respond to things with anger and with upset. But there's this other thing that can happen.
Yeah. What else? What else arises that may be aligned to this other thing that can happen?
I mean, the cat's already dead, right?
Okay, the cat's already dead. So, I don't know that this is where you're going, but one thought that comes to mind that you brought us to, Wilcox, is if we're not willing to deeply feel grief, we are totally screwed. We got to actually be in that grief, right? And we got to be in that anger without the hot potato game of, I'm angry and I'm going to hurl this at you. So if there is revolution, the revolution can't come from the place where we're just throwing the hot potato of our rage and of our hurt and of our brokenness, right? So you were saying connection, right? This, we got to actually feel the deep, deep connection, which is devastating. So there's a word that Uchiyama Roshi brings forward, which I want us to explore in our last class. And I have to think skillfully how to do this, because I've now this has been we've been having fun. We've been talking about trolleys, we've been doing thought experiments. And now we're I feel like I've just sucked all the life out of the class tonight. So I have to think how to help us. Don't bring up the apocalypse. That's what they taught me in teaching school. But the last two quotes on the page. So that first one, I've read, that's from the Uchiyama Roshi, that passage that we talked about last week. I've talked about it a couple times today. But what the activity of a Buddha is, because that's what we actually need to realize, the activity of Buddhas. We can't be the son before the inheritance. We have to be the son who knows they're true, the child who knows their true Buddhahood, right? We have to act like Buddhas. So Uchiyama Roshi says, even though in our Zazen our activity is carried on together with the whole earth and all beings, there is no way we can carry out perfect action like a Buddha. Wait, Myobun, you just said we have to act like Buddhas. Uchiyama Roshi doesn't think that. Well, exactly. To think that we have achieved perfect action is simply to be arrogant. For thinking in such a way is, after all, nothing more than our own human judgment. In our Zazen, precisely because we have taken such a vow, we cannot help but repent our inability to fulfill it. Will the matter simply be settled by feeling bad about our inadequacy? He says no. To truly repent requires facing life straight on and letting the light of absolute reality illuminate us. It is in doing Zazen that true repentance is actualized. Now, if you grew up in a Christian setting, the idea of true repentance might just make your flesh crawl, but it's a really important concept in Buddhism, as it turns out. Let's just paraphrase what Uchiyama Roshi, what we think he's saying here, and then we'll take up, somehow, we will take up in terms that are joyous and help us move forward to change the world. We will take up the topic next week. Yeah.
Well, I think that touching this deep space in Zazen is promise.
Is promising?
Promising.
Yes.
Because it something that holds me in a certain way, and something that is interconnected, that the earth is also alive, yes, and intelligent, and that it begins to point me in a way that that we can find a way out, and that maybe we're not that dependent on politicians or whatever, as we think. And I don't know what we are going to do, but if the practice as a collective is similar to the practice as an individual, then I feel this deep space of Zazen is a promise. Yes. And, if enough people touch that space, I think things begin to move. And when I think of that young girl, 12 years old, that suddenly appeared, and it got lost from COVID, what was her name? Greta
Thunberg, yeah.
Yeah. What a miracle that was in a way. Yes. And that she was able to speak to a situation way beyond her years. That the earth has its own, and you're probably going to say that I'm crazy, but that the earth also has, its own sense of the situation, and that is carrying us. So that Zazen is promising. So
Wilcox is shaking their head.
Sorry. You can, you don't have to agree, and I understand what you're saying, but it may not. I'm just saying that I feel it as promising. You know,
So okay, so let's, right.
No, I am trying to ride your coattails, really. I'm trying to ride your promise and your hope.
So hope is cheap, zazen is hard, which that's what saves us, is that zazen is hard, right? But everywhere the Buddha and the ancestors talk about this great body, right? And it's not a metaphor to say that the Buddha together with all beings and the great earth is awakened at one time, right? It's not a metaphor. The earth isn't just thrown in as an afterthought. So how we touch that. Now, I still want us to grapple with, and we're at the end here, but with this idea of repentance. Like, we don't apologize for our inadequacy. We don't feel bad for it. There's a lot of feeling bad about how little we do or can do, right? That I think is kind of common in our culture, like, am I doing enough? Or I'm doing everything I can and it's not enough. There's lots of flavors of that sense of inadequacy. Ujjayi Roshi is saying, it's not about feeling our inadequacy, nor is it about like feeling our greatness. It's repentance. And Zazen as being a place of repentance. And so whatever that means, I think there's something there that we need to delve into and that we've been talking about since our very first class. And, the image, if you watch that clip from The Good Place about the actualized, did anyone watch that clip I sent, the actualized trolley problem? Well, a character gets splattered with blood from the carnage on the tracks. And so that's why I keep saying, none of us gets to keep our shirt clean. Like the cat's gonna get cut, or it's not gonna get cut. Something's gonna happen. You don't get to. So we've been talking about repentance in a way from the start, but next week I want us to look like, what does that mean? How do we hold our falling short, our inevitable falling short of literally being a Buddha? How do we act like Buddhas, recognizing that, well, we're also just another jerk on the bus, whatever the Joan Osborne quote is. Okay. That sort of feels indefinite. Does that feel like the kind of direction, though?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you for sharing, and thank you for going to these places. Let's close with the refuges. Oh, we'll also be talking about the refuges, because that's sort of helpful, too. Okay.
Buddham saranam gacchami.
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks.
Saranam